The FIFA World Cup, which will open in Qatar on Sunday, has been marred by reports of the inhuman treatment of migrant workers who built stadiums and by controversy over the country's poor record on LGBT rights. But Piers Morgan thinks the criticism has been somewhat hypocritical. Here he is speaking to Emily Maitlis on the Newsagents podcast.
Piers, let's turn to football. We're 4 days away from the opening of the World Cup. David Baddiel told us that he's staying home, that his version of football is staying home. Gary Lineker said he wouldn't receive Qatari money. He doesn't like the feel of it. I think the word Baddiel used was reprehensible. Would you go to Qatar? You excited about the games?
I'm going to Qatar. I'm doing some punditry for Fox for the America-England group stage because my show airs in America and England, so why wouldn't I? And also, I've got to say, I find a lot of this sports washing debate laced with rank hypocrisy. I mean, I read a column last week in which I went through all the problems that all the countries in the last 32 have. And I mean, for example, 8 of the countries in the last 32, that's a quarter of the countries in the World Cup finals, outlaw homosexuality. 1 in 4 countries. So if you're going to use that as the stick to beat Qatar with, you have to then beat the other 7 countries. You don't have a World Cup. And if you don't have it in Qatar, which is the first Middle Eastern country to have it, where do you have the World Cup? Do you go to Africa, where many countries it's illegal to be homosexual? Do you go there? So that rules out that continent. Do you go to America, which has rather draconian laws about abortion, which play very badly, for example, in the UK? In other words, once you start putting your moral halo on,
right,
where does it stop? And who is morally clean enough to actually host a World Cup? Are we the country that illegally invaded Iraq, which then started a 20-year reign of terror by ISIS? Are we morally clean enough to host a World Cup? I mean, I just think it's fraught with hypocrisy.
So a lot of whataboutery there. Is that basically a big...
It's not whataboutery, it's facts.
Well, it's a 2 fingers up to members of the LGBT community and presumably to the thousands of migrant labourers that have died in the making of Qatar in the last 10 years or so. I mean, is that a kind of like Piers Morgan doesn't really care about gay rights?
Would you ever go to the Middle East?
I haven't been for a while.
Would you go to the Middle East?
I would.
Right. End of debate.
Why is that the end of the debate?
Well, if you don't agree with what they do, don't go there.
Well, I don't think that's the same thing, is it? I mean, we're looking
It's absolutely the same thing. This is what I mean about the hypocrisy. It's completely the same thing.
I haven't been there for a while. It's a really silly answer. What did you make of that? That was some interesting arguments, I thought.
He's entirely right. Look at some of the teams in the group stages. Saudi Arabia, I mean, no more morally clean than Qatar. You could go a bit further. You could look at a country like Poland or Serbia. Poland's looked at as kind of like an illiberal democracy now in Europe, a bit like Hungary. You could look at the United States with regards to abortion. I don't think that's like, what's going on in Qatar with regards to LGBT rights, but you can see why there's a good political argument not to stage a major sporting event in the United States, for instance. So I do agree with them. I don't think Qatar should have been awarded the World Cup. I don't think that for a moment. But the selection of it to me seems a bit strange. Somebody, if you're willing to fly on Air Emirates, if you're willing to go and stay in Abu Dhabi, or if you're willing to go, on a holiday somewhere in the Gulf, I do find it a bit irritating, frankly. The problem here was in the awarding. The problem here was a lack of political will around this tournament during the construction of the various stadia and whatnot. And now we're a week away from this. Rather than politicians and journalists doing their job, people are expecting football coaches and players to have a voice. It's absurd. So if people want to go and, support their teams out there, good luck to them. I kind of do agree here on the hypocrisy. That said, FIFA never should have given the World Cup to Qatar for a number of reasons. I mean, Christ, Michael, this is basically one city which is going to be host to a World Cup in the middle of December, still scorching temperatures for the players there. Workers' rights terrible, and of course the LGBT rights are terrible too. But I think one thing you could do in awarding future tournaments, if you were FIFA, is to ensure a certain labour minimum with regards to standards. You could collaborate presumably with the International Labour Organization, the ILO, to enforce that. That's one thing you could do. But I don't think that it's now up to supporters and players and coaches to be the moral arbiters here. That lets FIFA and politicians, and I think quite a few journalists too, off the hook.
lots of people are very, I think understandably, pretty annoyed that it's at Qatar and do support a boycott. So let's look at some arguments as to why that might be the case. And there are some reasons I think, that is specific about Qatar. Obviously, he mentioned there, the war in Iraq, and, no one said we should boycott tournaments in America or Britain. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Quite a good point, in fact. What you could counter that with is to say that there is a way in which this World Cup is more implicated than other sporting events in countries which have also done bad things. And that's because, you have intimated towards this already, Aaron, that you can say the World Cup itself is directly responsible for hyper-exploitation. There was a story in The Guardian very recently about this. It's about security guards working in the World Cup park. So The Guardian write this. The guards say they work 12-hour shifts and claim they usually get just one day off a month. We just go between our duty and our accommodation, said one holding out his phone. You can show me anywhere in Qatar and I won't know where it is. Analysis by The Guardian of workers' pay notifications corroborated by workers' accounts of their working hours and pay suggests that the guards are typically paid £310 a month for 348 hours on duty plus a small food allowance. It is understood that this includes 104 hours of overtime, for which they are paid 150 riyals, which, if correct, equates to less than 35p an hour. Such working hours and overtime pay appear to be in breach of Qatar's labour laws. The security guards say they know that they are being underpaid but feel powerless to act. It's illegal, but the government keeps quiet. So what can we do? Claims one. There's also, of course, been much focus on LGBT rights and women's rights. Naz Mohammed is a gay Qatari living in exile. He spoke to Sky Sports about what life is like for LGBT people in Qatar.
A lot of us over there really don't know about each other, right? Because it's unsafe. And when one person is found out, the law enforcement punishes them and then taps into their entire network. They really just, we have no right to privacy, basically. They will go in, they'll go through your contacts, they'll try to find all the other LGBT people that you know. So that's a risk. So people really try to keep their networks small. Then on top of that, if you saw the Human Rights Watch report that came out recently talking about the Preventive Security Department and how they're basically kidnapping and torturing people in solitary confinement, for their sexual orientation and gender identity, they would bring the same person more than once to these facilities and beat them up and subject them to conversion practices. And then they would offer some of them they would offer them some safety in exchange for working for them as undercover agents. And some people do that for their safety because they're trapped. And so now you have the situation where you're scared of your own community there because you don't know who's working with the law enforcement. You don't know who would get caught and get your information leaked. It's like survival for the fittest situation. And it's just terrible.
So I suppose there are a couple of bits of evidence as to why people might be, wanting to boycott Qatar. I suppose I should also say I have every respect for anyone who is boycotting the World Cup in Qatar. It's very much a legitimate position. It is just, it is a bit rich, someone like Emily Maitlis who, she says, I haven't been to the Middle East in a while. She still would. But for some reason, she thinks it's morally bankrupt for someone to go to the World Cup in Qatar. It's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Look, Michael, we're not saying that a boycott's stupid or it won't do anything or you shouldn't do it. But at the same time, I wouldn't stigmatise somebody who's not engaging in a boycott. Look, if you're Welsh and you're a supporter of the Welsh national football team, they've not been to a World Cup since 1958. They're going to this World Cup in Qatar in 2022. I think, of course, you're going to watch it. Of course, you're going to support your team. If you could afford it and you had the inclination, I can totally understand why you'd go to Qatar. And actually going somewhere like that and highlighting what's going on, talking to people, talking to workers, talking to Qataris. That's also that's a form of political engagement. So the idea that you're not going to, I'm in England and I'm just not going to watch a game on the TV. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you. That isn't political action. It's not. Maybe some people disagree, but that's my view on it. I think if that's political action in the 21st century, well, we're pretty screwed because it's incredibly passive. Political action tends to be active and engaging with people and persuading people. I actually increasingly feel like maybe Qatar made a mistake with this because I think it's not going to be good for them to be in the spotlight in this way, in the global spotlight for a long period of time. We're seeing it now with football, with drinking rather. You won't be able to drink outside the specified fan zones. In Stadia, you will be able to if you're in executive boxes, which cost an extraordinary amount of money. And I feel like, look, perhaps you shouldn't award, alongside the Olympics, one of the most important commercially significant sporting events on earth, to an autocracy which imposes quite strict religious law. Just an idea. Maybe don't do that. If you want the whole world to converge there, then they have to offer hospitality to them. I think that's quite straightforward. It's a bit like what we saw with the Danish cameraman and his team, Michael, in Doha, and they were told to stop recording, and the security guard said they were going to smash up the camera. You've asked to host the World Cup, that the media have now converged into your country. What were you expecting? So if you don't want people in your country drinking alcohol, having fun, if you don't want LGBT people in your country, I wouldn't say fine, because it's not fine, but don't put in a bid for the World Cup, because those people are going to come. Again, it's with FIFA, Michael. It's with FIFA. And I wouldn't want to really blame anybody else, personally.